Hello, everyone. Welcome to another installment of my interview series. I am joined by Bailey, who is the Esports Product Lead at Blizzard. So we can maybe start right there, Bailey, and there's always a lot of job titles at these big companies and everything that goes around. What is it that an Esports Product Lead does at Blizzard?
Yeah, so I'd say it varies a little bit by title, as kind of each of our titles have a different approach to esports. For Overwatch in particular, my main focus is helping advise on format and helping work with our different teams. It's a little bit different than the OWL world. In the OWL world, we had the really big team at Blizzard, but for OWCS and some of our other programs, it's a lot more vendor-led with EFG, our partner for this year, and WDG in Asia. A lot of my role is kind of execution focused, helping guide those teams to the Blizzard vision for esports and what we're hoping to get out of the partnership. A lot of it is kind of working with main teams for our comp ops teams, broadcast, marketing, and also the FACEIT platform, helping make sure that's good to go. That's a big explanation, but that's kind of the broad gist of it. Is I work with all the teams, just helping kind of guide them for what we want to do with esports.
And in terms of, I guess, sort of internal structure, is it still Sean Miller am I right in thinking Sean Miller is still the head of esports as such, and
Yep,
you
that is correct.
you and your team fall underneath him?
Yes.
So could you tell us a little bit about how you got into that role and what your experiences were before this, and that you're now bringing into this sort of new project?
Yeah, exactly. So I started my esports journey competing in Overwatch Collegiate. I went to University of Maryland a long time ago in the US. That's how I first kind of dipped my toes in Overwatch Esports. After that, I worked at a Hell Esports actually, which if anyone's familiar, that was Jane's old kind of pet project with Get Good long time ago. Worked there for a couple of years alongside I was trying to be a coach at the same time. I tried being a player in the ecosystem. I wasn't the best, moved into coaching while I was at Hell. Eventually kind of moved into the admin side, TO and operations, specifically with a focus on broadcast production. I worked on a couple seasons of Contenders a while ago. Then I also worked at a esports production company called eStar Studios, doing a bunch of different esports all over the place. And eventually took that experience back to Blizzard. I first joined on the operations side as a PM, and then the Calling All Heroes program was a little bit underway, and it was a good bit of a natural fit for me. I have a lot of experience with DEI esports and also just general like esports program leading. And so I took over that role as the product lead for Calling All Heroes initially, helped launch that program, while also I would say I did 50% of my job was Calling All Heroes and the other half was OWL. And then through that experience, it's kind of what landed me up here.
So you've got a little bit of everything under your belt for see it from all sides. So then there must be a point. I don't know exactly how it works, but someone comes to you at work and essentially puts the assignment on your desk. We need you to build the replacement for Overwatch League. So how do you and the team go about starting that? And what were the sort of goals you were maybe given as a team for what they were looking for out of this new system?
Yeah. I'd say transitioning out of Overwatch League is actually such a monumental project that like it's very hard to see from the outside. And there's so much going into it. I would say though that like kind of the main goals that we really thought about was I think a big thing is just how do we transition the player base and keep people engaged. That's been a big focus, just making sure that we maintain that core player base that was playing in our prior products of OWL and the Path to Pro, going into the new OWCS and FACEIT ecosystems. Additionally, we've had a lot of good success with some of our other programs. We've seen growing numbers for programs such as like Dive Party, Flash Ops, old OD tournaments, Collegiate. We've had really good participation growth in those events, even when compared to other esports. So that was a big focus for us is just let's provide some open competition that's accessible, anyone can participate. And we don't have everything out quite just yet, but we think it's going to be pretty exciting for folks to be able to see like there's a lot of different ways to engage at different points, and we think that's going to be a really big opportunity for folks to participate and us to continue to grow that participation.
And maybe we can break this next question down, but how are you measuring success this year? And maybe we can break that down into we're in the middle of our first tournament now. What does a first successful tournament look like? What does a first successful LAN look like? And what would a first successful year look like?
Yeah, so to start off with the first tournament, I think too, like, might be a simple answer, but I think just having it happen. There's so much that has changed that We're working with a new vendor. This is the first time for Overwatch since OWL started years and years ago that we're working with a vendor leading our program that's external to Blizzard. I think just running the tournament, having it executed, that to me is like the number one. Like, let's get it done. Let's have it happen. Let's let gamers game is something I like to say. It's like just let people play the game. Um, so I think that's kind of the first part. I would say a secondary goal to that is just awareness, making sure people know what's happening. That's a big focus for us. A lot of people were used to the OWL schedule, like where to go. It's always on these dates. I always got to follow these teams, these Twitter accounts, and we have to do some retraining. And there's some work on our side to do to make that accessible, make people aware of that stuff, and just know where to go, how to follow it. And I'd say that's kind of initial success for us. Um, and then I believe the next part of your question was the live events, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. For live events for us, I think it's for me and many other people, I think like live events are a really big opportunity for us to kind of make people like fans that last for a while. Like you or someone else has ever gone to a live event, it makes like esports real. Like it feels so different than just whatever broadcast is on the weekend that you're watching, and they all kind of blend together and look the same. But I think the live events make these memorable moments that you think about for a long time. Like I remember I went to Al finals in Philly a long time ago. I think it was season two Goats was in Philly. Yeah, and that to me was like super memorable. I had a really great time there, and that's kind of like fostered huge amount of interest for me for esports and Overwatch. And I think it's very hard to quantify this, but making people have a memorable experience and keeps them engaged with esports long term, to me shows like that was a good success, and it was a cool moment that a lot of people saw and just had a good experience with.
Do you have, because obviously it's going to be at DreamHack, which has sort of its already sort of existing feel and tone. Is there work being then put into make Overwatch stand out and not just feel like another thing at DreamHack, but almost this is a very Overwatch specific thing happening here?
Yeah, definitely. That is something that we are working on currently. We're thinking of ways to kind of make Overwatch distinct, have a unique experience at DreamHack. I think too, part of that also though is it will be a DreamHack experience. I think first and foremost is you're going to go there, be a DreamHack. You get to experience broad esports, which I think is super cool. Then also we'll have a unique Overwatch activation and space around OWCS that folks can go to. It feels a little bit distinct around Overwatch. And I think that's going to be really exciting.
And then if we were to look at the year as a whole, then what's the sort of big overarching goal where maybe if it got to the end of the year and what are the sort of things that would have happened where you could look back on it and go, yeah, that's what we wanted. It's been a good year.
Yeah, a couple things. The first thing I said is like, let's just transition. Let's have it happen. Let's get it through it. I know that is like the low bar, but I think it's a lot's changed, and I think just getting through that is kind of a win in itself. The second to me is growing participation, as I talked about earlier. I think it's really important that there's a lot of ways to engage in your esports programs, any skill level. Like I think the plat player that wants to play in an esports team and wants to play in a tournament, they should have something to do. They should feel like they can do it or have a goal to reach towards. So continuing to grow participation in all of the programs that we host. Viewership's a big one. I think it's a pretty easy like, are people watching your esport? Do people know about it? It's a pretty easy quantifiable of like, our esport is succeeding because we have X viewership or not. It's always not this end all be all, but it is a big kind of identifier of how we're doing. And then I think another thing too is crowdfunding. That's a good way we're kind of evaluating the interest in esports and the health of what we're doing. And then I think finally too, it's this is a bit of a different model than old with Overwatch League. We're working with vendors, and the partnerships is a bit more important this year simply because we're working with these external partners. We want them to have a sustainable experience with Overwatch esports as well.
On the vendors as well, how is the work sort of divided? Because most of us have obviously used to the Overwatch League system where Blizzard were the sort of in charge of everything, did everything. What sort of stuff is FACEIT and WDG's responsibility, and what stuff is still on the Blizzard side?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of the programs are with our vendors, leading a lot of our operations and execution. A lot more than the OWL days when, as you said, everything was internally, basically. Currently, it's divided where the ESL FACEIT group, EFG, is handling our West and currently our live events, the major and the finals this year. with WDG leading all of our Asia programming. WDG is also having a bigger role in some local, like scholastic, high school, some amateur programming. In the West, the FACEIT team is we don't have everything shared just yet, but we're looking to kind of expand and offer a lot of different programming through FACEIT, which I think is pretty exciting. That will be kind of offered in the current regions that we're offering on the platform, which I believe is North America, EMEA, South America, and ANZ through FACEIT. And that's kind of how it's divvied up at the moment.
We see there's sort of also, with the two different vendors, we've also actually got two quite different tournament styles in terms of, in Asia, we've got sort of one big tournament that all feeds into the LAN event, whereas we've got two separate tournaments in EMEA and North America. Was this a choice you made at Blizzard, or was this something where the vendors wanted sort of a different version of each event particular to their region?
Yeah, I'd say it's a bit of a combo. I would say that our approach in the West differs from the East due to a couple reasons. I'd say the first is in Asia, we have our 3 subregions, and that kind of drives the product a bit. For us, it's really important to have those regional places where the Japan ecosystem has a place to grow, compete among itself, and then meet the rest of the group, instead of just right off the bat going against the Koreans and getting smashed. That's not fun. No one likes that. We want people to have the opportunity to play, grow, and have your own place to succeed, build that ecosystem up. So that's why we have the 3 subregions in Asia that they're able to work through. And then eventually that will all meet together with some like cross-regional tournament or cross-subregion, or whatever the verbiage is, like in Asia with all the regions coming together. And that's a bit why the product's a little different. For us to do that all in 2 cycles before the major is really hard. So it makes a bit more sense for us to have the kind of stuff that's intra-regional, and then we have the inter-regional later in the stage leading up to the major. In the West, it doesn't really make as much sense to break up North America or EMEA. EMEA maybe a little bit more, and that's something I've seen some other esports do. But in North America, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, I think. And I only really see like Collegiate break it up in North America, and that's kind of it. But for us, that's kind of what drove a lot of the product. And then also working with our vendors, a bit of it is kind of what they're looking for, what aligns with their goals. WDG and EFG have some different priorities, and they're both operating in different regions with some different tastes. I would say something that is really interesting is that in North America and EMEA, something that I personally think is we have a very large like casual competitive base, people who want to play on a team, they want to play 1 game a week and scram a couple days a week, and then they're not going to go pro, but they want to be part of something, be part of a team, compete in that. And they like to play in events like Flash Ops and Dive Party. That's something I've noticed a lot, and we want to support with our product. So having 2 stages kind of serves that a little bit better. In Asia, we've noticed that a lot of teams don't always participate in these big open events, and our participation base is much smaller, especially in Korea. Tends to be people don't want to go against old owl pros in Korea. If you're an amateur team, you go like, oh, I'm against Runaway first round. Sucks. And so that's not as exciting for them. So other competition tends to be more favorable. So for us, we didn't see much of a benefit of having like multiple events with multiple qualifiers that we would see the same in the West. And then something you don't think about is also holidays, like Lunar New Year, Thanksgiving, and stuff like that actually isn't global. And so that does drive a little bit of the calendar that we have to work around. So it's kind of just fitting in all that together, which is a mouthful, but that's kind of why it does seem a little bit different in both regions.
I think that makes sense, especially when you look at, say, the open qualifier that led to where we are now in Korea. It was a much smaller pool of signups than we experienced in EMEA or North America. So spending more time on that probably wouldn't have been as enjoyable for a lot of the teams competing. And that kind of brings me on to then in the Asia region is a bit more straightforward in terms of you play a tournament, your regions get combined, you kind of play a knockout bracket until there's 2 teams left standing, and then you get to go to the big event. Whereas over in EMEA and North America, because there's 2 events, we're going to use the circuit point system, which is very much a brand new system, really, even though I guess we've seen this in other esports in terms of you get points from events that lead to a big end of year or mid-year event. Can you talk a bit about, I guess maybe a lot of people also don't even know too much about the circuit point system. What is it, and why have you gone in this direction compared to just a more straightforward win a tournament, go to an event?
Yeah, definitely. So something that I thought was really beneficial was having multiple like open qualifiers so that you don't feel like you're locked out for a season. Like with the old open division system, it was like have the one thing, nothing for 5 months if you're a tier 3 player. We didn't really want to create that opportunity. We want to have more touch points that were more frequent for players to engage. And therefore, to keep them consistently engaging, we do need an incentive. And circuit points are a good incentive besides pricing. It kind of makes these imaginary money or things you need to play for to make to the event. Um, for those who aren't aware, how we're doing qualification is for the major. It's the first place team from stage 2, which is our second tournament cycle before the major. Will automatically qualify from both regions, NA and EMEA. And then our top 2 teams after that in circuit points will qualify. Um, then for the finals, it'll be the top teams at the end of stage 4. It'll be the first place team from both regions will qualify, and then the next highest 2 in circuit points will go, and the circuit points will be for the entire year. So a bit of also why we did this was that we wanted to, some feedback I've always gotten from players is it's really hard to handle, is in the amateur scene, people are always like, Blizzard, can you incentivize teams to stay together? And that's really hard to do. um, and this might not be the perfect solution, but I think this works towards that. It's something we tried in Calling All Heroes that I was a big proponent for, where keeping kind of there are problems with circuit points, but I think it is an incentive for teams to want to stay together, to build together, and kind of stick around instead of just blowing up the roster and reforming a team every contender season or every level boss season. I think even with a circuit point system, you're still going to see that a bit. But we have some guardrails in place this season, I think, that take some learnings from Calling All Heroes and other esports that I think incentivize that a little bit more. So our hope basically is that we want to keep people engaging in each tournament cycle this year, plus keep the teams together. And we think the circuit points are the way to do that. And if it finds out not to be, or it's frustrating, we're gonna look to reevaluate. But I think it's a good first step to kind of try to solve this problem that I've had so many people talk to me about, and there's not a great solve. So that's kind of where we're coming at from that. And I think too, something that is common in other esports is that points are team locked. So like in VCT, it's like your team, whatever team has the points. For OWCS, we're making it player locked. So it's like the points follow the player. Not all esports do that, but I think kind of just the current ecosystem of Overwatch, that makes sense. Players move around a lot. We don't want to punish people if they want to leave their team. We want individual performance to be rewarded. So I think for right now, it kind of makes sense with how we've structured it. Some other esports are very strict of like, you need 3 to 5 players the whole year. If you lose that, you lose all your points. And I think that was a little much for where Overwatch is right now. But that is something I see in other esports to like especially make sure teams stick together.
Yeah, because traditionally a lot of it, or at least especially in contenders, what would happen is there would be essentially like one single spot, and then if you were owned by, say, an org or an academy team, the org would hold on to that spot. But once you got
Yep.
below that, it would become obviously someone's got to essentially hold all the chips on the behalf of the team, and it could end to a lot of difficult situations without a proper structure there. Whereas I think the circuit point system, in theory, should solve some of that because it doesn't allow one person to be in control of necessarily everyone's fate.
Yeah, 100%. That's something that like I was actually just about to say. I think it's actually very player friendly. And it's like something that's hard to quantify, but in the new ecosystem, there's gonna be a lot of new orgs, and as you said, like one person can hold the keys. And with circuit points, that can't really happen. Like you need your players, and the players have a lot more agency. And I think this protects them when, especially when we're moving from the OWL world where we had so much more regulation and procedures set in place. Full open ecosystem, the circuit points just kind of gives a bit of that agency back to the players after we're coming down from this big step down. Not a step down, I guess, but new structure.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, and maybe this is just the nature of working with teams and working as a coach, but whenever there's like a new system or a new set of rules, the first instinct is, can I exploit this in some way to my advantage? So obviously there's maybe a risk with this as well. If, say, I'm a circuit point team or I've got a certain number of circuit points, I think, if I get rid of a couple of players and sign a couple of players with more circuit points, I can cheat the system and jump myself up qualification. Now, I know there's already a guardrail in place for that, whereas if you stick the same core, I think it's 3 players, you can't go above your original total. You can't just cut a low circuits point guy and get a high circuits point guy in. But in theory, if you really wanted to decimate a lot of teams and regions, what you could do is take one player from a selection of teams to try and bump yourself up. Is that a worry? That might, once we get to that sort of breaking point where you're going to calculate the circuit points for teams, that someone's going to try and pull from all these different places and build some sort of like optimal circuit point team to cheat a qualification spot away from somebody else?
Yeah, I think realistically, that's just the bad side of circuit points. There's always going to be some team that if they rocket and just blast through all the tournaments, they're going to be able to like mathematically qualify themselves in. We saw this with Calling Out Heroes, where we had a very basic circuit point system. It was just circuit points for every event. We took your top 2 so that you could like miss an event, and then we took a top 2 from majors, top 2 from minors. We had 3 of both, so you could bomb 1 or not show up and still have good point value. And then we took top 5 per players, or top 5 players per team. With that learning, I mean, this is not a secret, but there were some teams that were able to kind of just mathematically get to our championship because by the end of the season, they had enough points that they just qualified themselves in. So building the OWCS rules, we thought about that a little bit. And as you talked about, we have that rule of kind of the guardrails of when you switch your rosters, you can't go above your like original point value when going into the events. And that rule's a bit more complicated, but I think that helps accommodate a bit where like you're not incentivized to just grab a player to get higher circuit points just to get it. There are a bit of restrictions. We're also changing it a bit. Instead of just top 5 point holders, it's top 5 players by playtime. So you can't just grab a sub, they roster ride, and you boost your points. You have to actually play them, which has a bit of an impact. So I think that's a good change. And also, something that we did want to explore was that in Calling Out Heroes, we had static points the whole season, and it was just like same value the whole time. We're now increasing it that I believe it's stage 2 and 3 have higher points than stage 1, so they're double points. And then stage 3 is, I think, 50% more than, or stage 4 is 50% more than stage 3. So for that, we think it's a bit healthier, where because each subsequent stage has more points attached to it, you can't exactly camp it out. Because if you still bomb the final, like stage 4, or you bomb stage 2, you're not going to be able to point qualify yourself in because the stage that is qualifying you in like is worth more points. So like mathematically, it's a lot harder to just camp it out. I think that always could end up. There's a lot of esports where that happens. There's one team that's just like they're going into the qualifier, but they already won. But we think that helps. And then also too, especially with an international event, seeding does matter. And if you want to be the first place team from your region and dodge the #1 Korean seed or something, you're incentivized to try to win the event to get the higher seed. So I think there is still like an incentive that even if you qualify yourself in by points, that team might be the best team in the region, but they're still incentivized to like play and try to win and have a competitive roster.
On the nature of qualification as well, one topic that's maybe come up a lot is at this point when you're figuring out the structure and working with vendors, you also have to at some point decide how many teams are we putting on the big LAN events and how are we going to divide, because not a lot of things divide nicely by 3 and also fit nicely into a tournament bracket. So how did we get to the number 8 and the 3-3-2 split we saw?
Yeah, I would say a lot of it is like, as you said, it's not a pretty number. It's dividing 8 by 3 does not work. So unfortunately, we have to divvy it up a little bit. Right now, this is kind of where we're taking it from this year, following a bit of kind of World Cup performance and just general like where we're having our events is kind of informing our team slots, and we're going to reevaluate in future years and just continue to see what makes sense. But just in general, live events are very complex. There's a lot going on, and we're not able to bring every team out that we want to. Having a giant 32 team event in another country could be super cool, but there are a lot of challenges to do that. So we have to kind of prioritize where we can.
So it's the sort of thing we could see change in the future. I know some other games sometimes do a system where if a team from your region wins the major or wins the end of year, they actually also gain more spots for their region in future qualifications. Is there any chance of something like that?
That's definitely on the table. I I know exactly what you're talking about. Like with MSI for League of Legends, the winning region gets an extra spot at Worlds. I think it's a really cool incentivizer that helps make your mixed season event a bit bigger because you're not just taking home a trophy, you're taking home like the regional pride and like, oh, we get an extra qualification slot for Worlds. That I think is really cool and is a really like incentivizing thing to perform. And also, as you said, like it helps kind of gauge the region's strength year to year. So definitely on the table, but don't know at this time.
On the topics of lands as well, so obviously we've got 8 teams who are going to go from 3-3-2, and it's going to be Dallas and then Stockholm. But then there's a bit of a discrepancy between the roster limit for all the teams in all the regions is 8, but the funding available is only for 6 players covered to the event, or 6 members of staff / players covered to the event. So can I ask why there's the discrepancy? Because obviously maybe some of the org teams have an org to sort of cover this, but if any of the sort of group of friends teams, I guess for lack of a better word, they might then be penalized for having a sort of larger roster or something like this.
Yeah, definitely something that we've seen. Just kind of unfortunately with all the challenges of getting folks to live events. At this time, we're only able to support 6 members per team.
Okay, then I wanted to ask a little bit more about the region locking as well, because this has sort of come to the fore a little bit again with some of the recent, once we got to our top 16, there were some disqualifications. So I think if we maybe just go through it one by one and see if where we are right now and if there's any update. So maybe the sort of most recent headline for the disqualification was obviously the Russian region isn't able to compete. My sort of presumption with this is we're probably just in a situation where for Russia to be able to compete again, we sort of need some kind of geopolitical resolution that might not quite be in your remit.
Yeah, I'm not able to talk too much about that, but for us right now, it's we're only able to support the players who we have in our rulebook that have and also have regions of the live service, which that does limit a lot of what we're able to offer for eligibility. But we're going to be pretty strict about that for everyone who's able to compete. It needs to be in those listed eligible countries.
And then I guess the next of, I don't want to start calling them the big 3, but is maybe China, who are obviously in a situation where the game's not currently available to play there. Would I be right in thinking the expectation is once NAT service is restored, my understanding is Blizzard and NetEase have reached an agreement, we're just waiting for regulatory stuff in China to happen, which will, again, not quite within your remit. But once NAT is established and the game is playable again in China, can we expect to see China re-enter the OWCS sphere?
Yeah, that's not something I'm able to comment on at the moment, but we're definitely looking to reevaluate if there are regions that get a live service. We'll discuss that on our team and see where we'll go from there.
And I guess maybe this is something you can't give me an answer to either, but because the theory would be it's potentially at some point this year, which would, I guess, put you guys in an interesting situation where they might need to be potentially integrated partway through a qualification system, which would be a headache, I guess, to say the least.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what we would do at this time, but we'll share more in the future if that becomes the situation.
Yeah, I guess there's probably an element of like the actual timing makes a big difference in terms of what options would be open in that situation. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about, I guess, the kangaroo in the room or the kangaroo not in the room, or the analogy is not the important bit, but Australia also finds itself sort of having to compete as import players when maybe, I guess, historically they've sort of been included in the Pacific region. Could you explain us a little bit why we're in this situation and maybe what the future looks like for Australian players going forward?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say that our current product is what we're offering for 2024. We're going to continue to evaluate like where we're offering our products and where we want to grow that in future years with our vendors. So discussions are on the table, but at the moment, we are working with the FACEIT team as we know there is a competitive core in that region alongside Latin America that even though Latin America players can participate in any OWCS, it doesn't really serve them. And we don't really see them participating that actively in terms of participation numbers. So we know that both regions have an interest in Overwatch Esports. They're very passionate. And for right now, we're working with FACEIT to provide something for them to compete in. And then we'll reevaluate future years when we're able to.
Okay. And then I wonder if this is maybe a bit of a FACEIT input as well, but obviously we've seen map bans introduced for, I think, the first time, I guess, in at least any recent history in Overwatch. What was the thinking behind wanting to include this, and what do you think it adds to the competition?
Yeah, I think there's actually like a couple of things that are pretty that like influence us. So I think like draft segments in esports broadcasts are super interesting. Being able to watch a VCG draft segment live, League of Legends drafts, other esports, to me is really exciting. It's unique broadcast content, especially for live events. We're able to engage our coaches in that kind of content. I think that's really exciting. I think it kind of is just different. It's unique. It's fun. I think it's something that we want to try, make it a little bit different. Distinguish OWCS from OWL by offering some different structure, different formats. I think the map draft is something to do differently. And I think also too, it's something that these big open Overwatch tournaments take a long time, and they're very
Yeah.
time consuming. Something that we thought might help is front loading the draft in the series. I think especially with the face integration, once folks have kind of gotten their feet wet with the program and the platform, and we do the draft to start a match, the series goes very quickly if there's not any issues. And I
Mhm.
think that's a really cool boon. There's obviously the talk about how it does change the strategic depth and like kind of play in a series. We saw a lot of 3-0s. Maybe we can say that Vito was responsible for that. Maybe not. But I think it is something that we're keeping top of mind. But for us, want to offer something differently. I think it's cool content, and it does definitely help on I think the player side of these very long, grueling series. We can help get them through a lot faster if it's just back-to-back games, knock it out. Um, and we're going to kind of explore this for the future. But right now, we're hosting this veto, and if it's not super successful, we're going to reevaluate. Maybe we'll change up a little bit on how it's structured. But this is how it is for now, and we're just going to see how it works.
Yeah, I think in general, I think the reaction to the idea is quite positive. There's probably a lot of like alternate ideas in terms of not to, but to me, a lot of the impressions I'm getting is people have like alternate ideas for the ban system rather than
Right.
let's stop doing the ban system. So I guess the big one is maybe the one you touched on, as whereas I know especially when we're working in Overwatch League, our map picks, we might have an idea at the start of the day, but we might change that as the series goes on, depending on
Totally.
how the matchup's going. And I understand very much when you've got hundreds of teams playing randomly, or randomly assigned matches through the elo system in the Swiss, it's really helpful. But once we get to maybe the group stage or even the main event, is it the sort of thing that we could see sort of reverted? So we sort of just have a pick and ban phase, play the map, pick and ban phase, play the map type thing.
Yeah. I think right now we want to keep the veto throughout the whole competition, but it is something that we like are thinking about. That it does change a little bit when you have time to prepare, and maybe it is just as you said. We just need to tweak the system. I think too. I think for most esports, no one slam dunked the veto system on the first time and it was perfect and it worked great. It needed a bit of evolution. Like some games have bans, some games have increased their number of bans over the years. They have different structures. I think that we're gonna find out the way it works. But for us right now, I think we'd probably look to refine instead of go back to like loser pick and do that.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't work out, we'll look into it and continue to explore it.
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely opened the door for a lot of different options, and I think for the most part, people are actually quite excited, especially once we get to these later stages where teams are particularly preparing for an opponent
Totally.
and are going to try and win the draft in a way that you're maybe not quite as able to when you're just playing one of 400 potential teams.
100%. I think also too an underrated thing where this isn't as impactful in the high end, but I think for a lot of our like mid to top level teams, preparation has always been something that's been cited to me. And I remember when I used to coach, having to prepare for a giant map pool is a nightmare. It's like I have a giant PowerPoint and there's rollouts for every map, blah 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 blah. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of time for these kids to practice every day, especially when the circumstances are different. A lot of players are amateur and they're doing this after work or after school. You don't have time to grind out 30 maps in a pool. So I think the Vita system does alleviate a little bit of that, and I wanted to be cognizant of that moving into this open ecosystem where we don't have as many players on these salaried rosters, and just be kind of aware of that they don't have as much time to play and practice so many maps, and kind of focus that down. And we're thinking the veto system allowed teams to really grind and like practice a couple maps and be more focused on that. I've seen that with CS:GO, where some teams are just like, I'm the train team and I'm like really good at this and I want to play this map. Same with Valorant. Like there's other things where teams are really good at specific comps and want to get these maps, and that has a big strategic impact. I think Overwatch plays a little bit differently than those games, so we got to find where that fits. But that was definitely like another motivator for us, was kind of being aware of just where our scene is going and making sure we're accommodating our player base.
I think even in Overwatch League, one thing that actually helped us from a team perspective prepare massively was that all the maps were predetermined in our regular season games. So we knew going into our weekend games, sometimes we actually need to prepare 7 maps. This is way more reasonable. Whereas when you go into like a tournament or a knockout bracket, like same happened with us in playoffs in Overwatch League, suddenly, instead of preparing 6 or 7 maps, what if you had to prepare all 15 or whatever it was? And it's like, oh, this is
100%.
really hard. So I think it does help a lot.
I think especially too, when we have these big open brackets, we have to be first to 2. And when you have 15 maps at a first to 2 tournament, if you're bad at one map and you get that one map, that could really impact your chances in your standings. So wanted to be really cognizant of that.
Is it the sort of thing that you would say is, maybe it's a hard one to answer, is it locked in for the entire year? Because we've seen with some of the stuff, there's been like initial flexibility as we figure things out. Is this the sort of thing that the ban system is what it is now for maybe this first tournament, but as we move through the year and there's room to sort of experiment or twist and refine as we go?
Yeah. I would say that we're not exactly sure just yet, but it is something that we're not entirely married to. If we want to look to reevaluate, we're going to do that, but I'm not exactly sure at this time.
Another thing that probably will be changing across the year is the patches will change. We obviously had a patch very recently at time of recording, and we expect more patches as the year goes out. Previously in Overwatch League, there was always a bit more elemental control over this because there was a tournament realm and you could force it on certain old patches. Is there much in line in terms of how the patch schedule is released to try and maybe dodge certain key moments in the OWCS calendar, like the majors or even the Esports World Cup in the middle for the teams getting ready for these big tournaments?
Yeah, so for us, I would say that kind of something I forgot to touch on earlier is that one of our big goals also this year is to showcase what's live. If anyone's a fan of LCS, they actually went to the live patch this week. They have a couple guardrails in place, or not this week, this season. LCS has been on the live patch compared to other regions. They have a couple guardrails in place to help prepare those players for that. And it's not necessarily the same case with Overwatch, but we are playing on the live patch for a majority of the season alongside all of our programming, kind of keeping that consistent. For us in this new ecosystem, we're not able to kind of manage the old dance of all the different patches and calling heroes is one patch, flash ops is this other patch, and contenders is this patch. That's not going to be the case. Everything's just going to be on what is live and what we have to work with. We are looking to kind of support a tournament realm for our big moments like the major and the finals to help with stability, show off maybe some cool skins, and also just help make sure those big moments are stable from a patch perspective, and support those. But for a majority of our season, players should expect that we'll be on the live service and we'll be working around that. And also just know for me, we know that the patch like the week of a tournament sucks and it's tough. But realistically, with an esports calendar, there's a lot of things that kind of inform your calendar. And unfortunately, like for example, if we have a big patch around Thanksgiving and we want to avoid that, but like maybe that weekend's perfect, but it's a holiday, it doesn't work out. So there are some things that do kind of drive like, we need a window for immigration. We have this holiday. We have Lunar New Year. We have blah, blah, blah. So we are going to work our best to kind of avoid being impacted by the live service as much as possible and make kind of a smooth experience for players. But within the realm of everything, there's a lot to juggle on the calendar. So we won't always land perfectly, but our hope is to kind of mitigate it as much as possible.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's like the big events especially, you want the highest level of competitive integrity you can sort of get, and that consistency will probably definitely help with that.
100%.
On the subject as well, it was also announced this week about the Esports World Cup, and I think I might realize you might not be able to give me any information now, but it was obviously mentioned the concept that OWCS is in some way going to serve as qualification for that event that's happening in June and July. Can you share potentially any details of how that's going to look, or when we might know more information about how important, say, some of these OWCS matches are in terms of qualifying for that future event as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not able to exactly share all that today, but that team will share more about the qualification and kind of the methods and how you get there. But I'd say for now, just do your best to know WCS, and you'll be well positioned to do whatever it is you want to do there.
And then I want to talk to you a little bit about the broadcast as well, because we've sort of got our first glimpse of a broadcast with group stage starting last weekend. And I wanted to know, is that sort of our baseline then for how groups will go? Are we expecting maybe more to come when we get to the main event, or maybe especially once we get to the live events as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think our groups and main event broadcasts will seem a little bit similar. Main events with a little bit more polish, a little bit extra added onto it. Our live events will have much more of a focus around those ones. We'll be preparing a bit more for those broadcasts, making the major and the finals some really cool broadcast moments with some extra content, more stuff going into it. So you can expect those to be a little bit bigger than our online shows. But I would say that the groups and main events will be pretty similar in terms of broadcast quality.
Then also we see the co-streams have been allowed, and even very recently we even an additional change to allow POVs to still be streamed during the group stage matches. How do the co-streams then factor into sort of the broadcast picture as a whole? And you're obviously doing quite a lot to promote these streams as well. What's the sort of idea and motivation behind that?
Yeah, I would say that I think all esports are going this direction. That people like to watch their favorite content creators watching an esports program, and for us, we know co-streaming is really important. I also think it's a great way to activate your non-esports folks into an esports show. There might be a lot of people that watch a specific streamer for Overwatch who don't exactly watch esports, but if their favorite streamer is co-streaming esports, that's great. That engages them and kind of brings that viewer to esports programs. We see so many esports get so much viewership, VCT, ALGS. A lot of that's from co-streaming, even LCS as well. We want to support that. And also, I think too, it's like from a content creator engagement standpoint, we want to provide content creators something to work with and outside the game. You don't have to play comp 8 hours a day. You can talk about OWCS. You can co-stream about OWCS, and it's something different to do that provides more content for a game. It's a little easier to engage with, maybe less stressful than a 12-hour comp stream. So I think that's something that's cool to offer. And for us, supporting those co-streaming is important. And we don't always have as many levers as we might want to promote those and engage with those. So for us, promoting the co-streams is kind of one way that we can help leverage and incentivize folks to engage with OWCS from a co-streaming perspective. And we're pretty happy with, I think the rules this year are a lot less lax than Overwatch League. So I think that's exciting. And we're seeing a lot more interest. So hoping to see that continue and kind of grow.
I want to talk to you about that as well, because obviously in terms of a broadcast talent, in terms of who we're going to be seeing on screen, it's a lot of the same people we're seeing from the Overwatch League. So isn't there, when we talk about the sort of tonal and, for lack of a better word, vibe of the show, should we expect the same then from Overwatch League, or are we trying to move in a different direction with the sort of break-in system?
Yeah, I would say with OWCS, I would say a big focus. We still want to have kind of this premiere broadcast with some of the best talent in the world. Overwatch talent are super talented and really awesome to work with. Want to showcase them at our show. I would say for overall tone of the show, I think you might see it's maybe a little bit goofier, maybe a little bit sillier, but still premiere and kind of this top esports product, but also want to have that more casual community feel. For us, that's something that's important overall, I think, to our approach. Maybe I should have touched on that earlier, but engaging our community, kind of being transparent and engaging them actively is a really big focus for us. And I think that is something that we'll showcase on the broadcast with some of the things that we're doing, and also with just some of the ways that we're engaging our players too, from the tournament side and the call side. So I think that should be something that you can expect. Maybe I wouldn't say a little bit less serious, but I think that just a bit more like community focused, I think is kind of where we want to have. We want people to feel like OWCS is a product that they can engage with, that they can relate to, and it's not this like alien beast of whatever it is. So that's a big focus for us.
So in terms of additional content, historically on Overwatch League, we've often seen things like comms check or even watch point if we go far enough back. Is there any kind of plans for this year's broadcast to provide some sort of extra content outside the live broadcast itself?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things we're looking to do is kind of leverage on the broadcast. We're looking to bring some guest interviews, some speakers on some little cool community moments. Maybe we're looking to bring that elsewhere through our channels. And then also we're looking to do a lot of short form content this year. The TikToks, the kids love them. I think that's exciting. It's just some extra stuff to engage with, get more folks on the program. And then I don't know actually our full slate, so we'll be sharing a bit more about our whole content offerings at a later time.
Is this the sort of thing we can maybe expect, especially once we get to the LAN events for majors? Everything will sort of ramp up to really highlight those events.
That's a great question. I do think we will have a bit more content, but I'm not exactly sure at this time.
Okay, then as for bulk of my questions, I did have one question my friend asked me. Now, ever since he asked me, it's really been stuck in my head. So I need to ask you, and I don't know if you can really, if it's too late to change it or if we can do anything about it now. But obviously, we've come from the Overwatch League, and the acronym was OWL, OWL. And then we go now to the Overwatch Championship Series. But if we had called it the Championship Overwatch Series, the acronym could have been COWS. And we could have done sort of animal to animal.
That would have been
segue.
Good.
So I don't know if it's too late now. Maybe
it's
too late now.
It's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah,
I thought I'd be remiss if I didn't share the idea and we miss out on that.
I've actually had so many people mention the acronym, and they're like, "Owl was so easy, rolls off the tongue." And like, with calling it heroes, people call it CAW, and like that's a very easy one to roll off the tongue. With contenders, we didn't have a great one. Collegiate, we don't really. So like the Colgate memes were the only thing that we had back in the day, but OWCS doesn't have a great one either. People were like, "Oh, do OCS OWCS." I'm like, "Oh, that doesn't sound great." But maybe cow is the way. We'll see next year.
Well, I'll charge commission for it, obviously, if that does go through. But I'm sure we can arrange a deal. All right, thank you very much, Bailey. I do appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for bringing me on. Super appreciate it.